You can't live in my house without paying rent. If you don't contribute, pack your bags right now, my stepfather said while my mother nodded, as always, by his side. I took a deep breath and calmly replied, okay, but who is going to pack your bags? Are you? With an ironic smile, I handed them some papers. The taste of revenge was already beginning to take shape when I saw the astonishment on their faces. Hi, I'm Agatha, and my story is about revenge that nobody saw coming. It all started when I was only 7 years old. My father passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. The memories of that time are fragmented, but I will never forget the day he was rushed to the hospital and never came home. My mother, Gilberta, was devastated, or at least that's what it seemed. Just a month after my father's death, she introduced me to German, her new partner. Although I was just a confused girl, I remember how strange it felt, that change so sudden, as if they were forcing me to forget my father quickly. Shortly after, my mother and German got married. He became my stepfather when I was only 8 years old. But the word stepfather does not even begin to describe the kind of person German was. He constantly reminded me that he was doing me a favor by putting up with me, and my mother, blinded by love, agreed with him in everything. I was forgotten, like a shadow in my own house. My mother dedicated all her energy to her new relationship, while German treated me like an unwanted burden. So I spent 10 long years being ignored and left aside, putting up with his indifference and contempt. But I survived, and it was thanks to my grandmother, who was always my true refuge. When I was about to turn 18, my mother and German called me for a serious talk. They started bluntly. Agatha, you have to start looking for work. We are not going to keep supporting you for free, they said as if I were a bothersome guest. I could not believe what I was hearing. I was a few months away from my final exams, and yet they still demanded that I start to pay rent or leave. Hearing those cold words, I asked almost pleadingly, does it seem fair to you, Mom? Do you agree with this? My mother, sitting next to German, answered without hesitation, soon you will turn 18. We have taken care of you enough. Her words hit me like a punch. They were selling the house to move to something better, but for me, that meant that I would have to start paying rent even without having finished school. That threat left me helpless. I called my grandmother, crying. She was the only one who cared about me. It was then that my grandmother revealed a secret to me about German. She told me that he was deep in debt, and that was why he was pushing to sell the house. He was living beyond his means, and now everything was collapsing. That revelation gave me a new perspective. If German thought he would get rid of me easily, he was very wrong. Agatha, you have to act fast, my grandmother advised me, with that look of someone who already knows more than she says. Do you know who his real estate agent is? No, Grandma, but why do I need to know? Just get me his contact, she insisted without revealing anything else. I was intrigued, but I trusted her blindly. I got the agent's name and phone number and sent it to her. After that, Grandma acted quickly. A few days later, she called me, asking me to go to her house. She said she had something important to tell me. When I arrived at my grandmother's house and entered, I knew that something big was about to be revealed. I spoke to the agent and obtained information about the price of German's house. Did you find out how much he's asking for? I asked, still not understanding my grandmother's plan. Yes, and it's a pretty affordable amount, she answered thoughtfully. German wants to sell the house as quickly as possible and is willing to lower the price if he receives the money immediately. I frowned, trying to understand where she was going. What do you think, Agatha? What do I think about what, Grandma? I asked, confused. She looked at me with that serious look that always preceded a great revelation. What do you think about buying the house for yourself? I was paralyzed. Her words seemed like a joke, but her face didn't show any smile. I hadn't even finished high school and only had about $200 saved. Buying a house was completely out of my possibilities. Grandma, how could I buy that house? I can barely pay for my hygiene products, much less a house the size of German's. My grandmother smiled enigmatically and shook her head as if she had expected that reaction. Agatha, I'm serious. The house is beautiful, and you have the right to be in a place where you feel safe. This is an opportunity. I laughed, still unable to believe what I was hearing. Grandma, I think you're dreaming too high. Where am I going to get the money? I only have $200. She looked me straight in the eyes and then said, "For now, you have $200, Agatha, but soon you will have much more than that." The tone of her voice made me shudder. It was as if she had kept a secret for a long time and was finally ready to tell me. "That's impossible, Grandma. I'm not going to win the lottery overnight." She smiled softly but kept her gaze steady. "Maybe not a lottery, Agatha, but you will have access to your trust when you turn 18. I froze. A trust? This was completely new to me. I had never heard anything about a trust, an inheritance, or anything like that. "Grandma, are you serious? You're not confusing me with someone else, are you?" She smiled tenderly and shook her head. "Your father and grandfather left a legacy for you, Agatha." "Raya didn't know that." "No. Mom always said there was nothing for me in their wills," I replied, still trying to process the information. My grandmother let out a sigh, the kind of sigh of someone who's kept a secret for a long time. "That's not true, dear. You have two sizable trusts waiting for you when you turn 18. The impact was like a blow. "Two funds?" I was speechless, trying to understand what that meant. My mother had always told me that I had nothing apart from some sentimental objects with no financial value. My grandmother looked at me with a mixture of sorrow and sadness. She lied, Agatha. Then she explained to me what the funds contained. I won't go into detail about the exact amount. Let's just say that it was an amount that would guarantee my future without having to depend on anyone. My grandparents and my father had entrusted that money to my grandmother since, apparently, they knew they couldn't trust my mother to manage it. They were right. I sat down stunned. The only thing going around in my head was the reason why my mother would have hidden this from me. Why lie? Did she perhaps think of keeping the money for herself? My grandmother nodded as if she could read my thoughts. "Yes, Agatha. I always had that suspicion. I'm sure she lied so that if she had the opportunity, she could get her hands on your money and empty it before you even knew it existed." I swallowed dry, feeling a mixture of rage and sadness. Suddenly, everything made sense. The times my mother avoided talking about finances, her evasive answers when I asked about what my father had left me. My grandmother continued, her voice turning soft and nostalgic. "Your father was a very intelligent man, Agatha. He would never have left you helpless. He loved you very much, you know. I think you would have had a wonderful connection if you had had the chance to get to know him better." I felt my heart tighten. I always knew my father loved me, but hearing it like that was like a stab of pain and nostalgia. "She endured a lot in that marriage," my grandmother continued, "all because she didn't want you to grow up in a broken home. She endured everything for you, Agatha." A wave of emotions enveloped me. Not only did I miss my father, but now I truly understood how much he had sacrificed for me. Sadness mixed with indignation as I realized how much my mother had deprived me of that legacy, of that security. I tried to remember my father's face, but his features were vague, almost erased by time. My mother, who should have been my source of memories, had been anything but an attentive mother. After marrying German, she seemed to have decided that he simply did not exist. Hearing my grandmother speak of him with such affection moved me deeply. I looked down and murmured I had forgotten. My grandmother sighed, placing a hand on my shoulder. "It's destiny, dear. I know that your life with your mother has not been easy, but now you have the opportunity to change that and, who knows, maybe to obtain a little justice in the process." I raised my head, intrigued. "How come, Grandma? What do you mean by justice?" She smiled in a complicit manner. "Agatha, now you understand why I talk so much about buying German's house. He is always threatening to throw you out, right?" It was like a revelation. Buying his house would not only be a smart investment, but it would also be my chance to turn the situation around, having the last word after years of humiliation and contempt. The idea of seeing him in my place, helpless and with no way out, gave me a satisfaction I had never felt before. "I would love to buy the house," I replied with a smile. I was sure she would understand. Investing in a property is never a bad idea, and the opportunity for a little revenge is too tempting to ignore. She nodded, pleased. "Good decision, Agatha. I will talk to the real estate agent and negotiate the price." In a few days, when you turn 18, we can open an account in your name and transfer all the money from the trust to you. The purchase will be in your hands." I nodded, still absorbing the magnitude of the plan. But my grandmother didn't stop there. "Oh, and one last thing. Ask people to keep our identity a secret. German is desperate to sell, but I don't want him to find out anything until the last minute." "Of course, Grandma. We're going to make it happen." She smiled, and I felt a trust between us that I had never felt before. I returned home that night with my heart racing. I still couldn't buy the house right away. There was a week left until my 18th birthday, but the wait would be short. I just needed one more week, and German had no idea what was coming. My grandmother took care of everything with the real estate agent and German's lawyer. It was not necessary for me to attend every meeting. At home, my stepfather was in an exceptional mood, as if he already had the money in his hands. He and my mother spent the days talking about how they would become rich with the sale of the house. They did not imagine that the buyer was me. On one occasion, when passing by their room, I heard a conversation that left me frozen. "In a few days, we will be rich, Gilberta." My agent confirmed that the sale will close soon. My mother laughed, satisfied. "I am so happy, German. It has been so long since we took a vacation. With this money, we will finally be able to plan something just for us. And don't even think about using it to pay debts." He replied, amused, "Have you already thought about what to do with the money?" My mother smiled with a coldness that made me shudder. "Of course. Just wait a few more days. When Agatha turns 18, she will have access to the trust like me. I'll be the owner of her account and transfer the money to us before she knows it." "Perfect. We pay off our debts, get a better house, and still earn some extra from renting it. Our life will be a paradise," said German, laughing. My mother nodded, almost giddy. "I can't wait, German." I walked away slowly, my mind spinning and my heart heavy. I knew my mother was not an example of motherhood, but at that moment, I realized I had underestimated her. Not only did she plan to steal the money my father and grandfather had left for me, but she also intended to use it to guarantee her and German's comfort, no matter what happened to my future. I had a joint bank account with her since. Before the age of 18, I was not allowed to have an account of my own. That is why my grandmother insisted that I open an account in my name as soon as I came of age. Now I understood that my grandmother knew perfectly well what was at stake. My mother would never have told me about the inheritance. She planned to hide the money and use it to feed her whims. After hearing that sordid plan, I went back to my room and cried like I hadn't cried in a long time. Part of me wanted to believe that my mother still had a little decency, that she couldn't be so cold. But that night, the last spark of hope went out. I finally understood that she was a ruthless woman, incapable of true love. What they didn't know was that I had a much bigger plan than theirs. I had stopped trying to have any connection with my mother before I turned 18. I accepted that we would never have a meaningful relationship. So, I put the feelings aside and focused on what mattered, the moment when karma would come to collect from my mother and German. The week of my birthday, I signed the papers to buy German's house. In a few days, everything was finalized, and now I was officially the owner of the house. My grandmother and I even had a small celebration, a mini party just for us, toasting this new chapter in my life. But buying the house was just the beginning. I had bigger plans, yet after closing the deal and taking possession of the house, I decided to keep it a secret. While my mother and German celebrated the sale by going out drinking and spending at the mall, I remained silent, watching them without suspecting anything. They didn't even bother to check on me or include me in the celebration. I wasn't expecting anything different. Then, one night after another of their outings, they called me for a serious talk. "We're very disappointed in you, Agatha. You still haven't gotten a job. Have you applied somewhere?" Keeping calm, I replied, "No, Mom. I'm not looking for a job now because my final exams are coming up." German snorted impatiently. "And you think this is optional?" "It is not. You need a job to pay the rent and the bills, Agatha." I looked at them, feigning naivety. "And why would I do that?" German crossed his arms and, with a cold smile, answered, "Because now you are 18 years old. We no longer must take care of you. We are going to need that money since we are not going to let you live for free in my house. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. I held back my laughter, but it escaped and a laugh echoed in the room. They remained silent, looking at me with confused and irritated expressions. German frowned, clearly offended. What is so funny, brat? Did I say something funny? I took a deep breath and, with a calm smile, answered, "The funny thing is that you think this house is still yours." German scoffed. "How can you say that? This house is mine, Agatha. You're not making any sense." I smiled, crossing my arms. "German? This house was sold. You sold it." He looked at me, his arrogance unwavering. "That does not matter, Agatha. When we move to the new house, you will come with us. And by the way, the new house will be mine too." He continued with that characteristic arrogance. "So, you will pay rent whether you like it or not." I rolled my eyes, pretending indifference. "You know, German, in that case, I think I will not move in with you." He frowned, confused. "What? And where do you plan to stay?" "Here. I like this house." German laughed, shaking his head. "You are crazy, girl. This house was sold. The new owner will not allow you to stay. Either you pay the rent and move in with us or you leave." I took a deep breath, enjoying every second of suspense, and finally dropped the bomb. "German? I don't need to move anywhere. Do you know why? Because this house is mine." German's expression froze. I took out the documents and put them in front of him. He grabbed the papers, and the color began to disappear from his face. My mother looked at him, pale, bringing her hand to her mouth, unable to contain the shock. "How is it possible? Where did you get the money?" she stammered, still incredulous. I smiled, finally revealing the truth. "You'll be glad to know that I gained access to the trust that Dad and Grandpa left me." "Trust?" "Yes, the same trust that you hid from me. The one you were planning to steal before I knew it existed." My mother blinked, trying to compose herself, and stammered, "I don't know what you're talking about, Agatha. I would never do something like that to my daughter." I rolled my eyes, without patience for her performance. "Don't pretend that you care, Mom. I know the only love you have is for your comfort and your man." She tried to smile uncomfortably, and in a second, her tone changed. "No, you're dramatic, Agatha. I'm so proud of you, buying a house so young. It's incredible. But I didn't fall for it." I knew she realized she'd been unmasked. Meanwhile, German remained paralyzed, speechless. He had lost the house at the hands of an 18-year-old girl and, even worse, at the hands of the stepdaughter he despised so much. My mother tried to continue the act, forcing a smile and saying, "Agatha, it's wonderful that you were able to buy the house. Now we can pay off German's debts and continue living here." I crossed my arms, looking at her with the smile of someone who was in control. "Mom, wait a moment. Who said that you two are going to stay in this house?" She straightened up, offended. "It's the least you can do for us, Agatha. After all, we took care of you for 10 years. I rolled my eyes incredulously. "Take care of me? You were quick to send me to look for a job and pay rent. Do you remember? What you owe me is much more than those 10 years of obligation." My mother blinked uncomfortably but continued to insist. "The least you can do is let us stay in our house." "You keep forgetting that the house is mine now, Mom," I replied coldly. "I took possession of it, which means you two need to pack your bags. And if you want to argue about it, go ahead, take me to court. Guess who has a better chance of winning?" She gasped, unable to process what I was telling her. "What kind of behavior is this? How can you do this to your parents?" I looked her in the eyes and replied with all the calm in the world, "You neglected me and also tried to steal my inheritance. If you can't be a good mother, why should I be a good daughter?" My mother began to cry in a desperate attempt to make me change my mind. "It was a mistake, Agatha. I'm so sorry. We can start over. I promise we'll be a real family from now on." But those tears no longer moved me. There were no more excuses. As soon as I could, I did what anyone would do. They kicked me out of my house, and instead of enjoying a luxurious vacation like they planned, they had to struggle to find a cheap place to live with what little they had left. With debts still suffocating them and without the financial help they expected from me, they continued to sink further into problems. The extravagant lifestyle they valued so much dragged them further and further down, and I could finally breathe. I am eternally grateful to my father and my grandfather for the trust fund they left me, because now I know I will be able to go to college debt-free and with a future that I will build by myself. Without them, I don't plan on going too far away, since I need to take care of my grandmother. She never abandoned me when I needed her, and I must be by her side when she needed me the most. My grandmother's health is deteriorating rapidly, and I know she may not have much time left. I want to take advantage of every moment by her side, creating memories that I will keep forever.